Dear friends, this is the second of my policy videos that I just started yesterday. And today I thought I'll just elaborate a little bit on two elements of that 10-part process that I outlined the other day in terms of the policy framework. These two parts are really important. Of course, every single question is important, and without that, you really can't get a good answer in terms of policy. But these two are really particularly tricky, and I'll just briefly highlight these two today in this short talk, and then I will go into detailed policy analysis separately. The first issue I want to discuss is government failure. Now, government failure is something that's totally missing from the analysis of most Western democracy regulatory impact statements. And the reason is it is the governments that do make these analysis, and governments are particularly reluctant to say that they actually fail. Whereas the failure of government is overwhelming, and we all as citizens know about that quite well. And particularly in India, that's a very big issue. It's a relatively less important issue in the West, for example, in a country like Australia where I work, because they have separately looked at government failure as a whole and devised systems of accountability where it is very rare to come across corruption, blatant corruption, let us say, in government. So that's very, very rare. It's almost unheard of. The other side is the competence, and I believe that for the most part, the Australian civil servants, or they're not called civil servants, they're called public servants. The Australian public servants, including the senior or junior, they're really competent compared to what we get in India. So they managed to get decent people into the system. They've also got accountability mechanisms of dismissal and performance management, by which those who are not really performing very well do not remain too long in the civil service or the public service. So effectively, the government failure in Australia is relatively low. And I wouldn't say it doesn't exist, but I'd say it's within a sort of tolerable zone. However, that's an exercise which needs to be actively considered while designing a policy. So, for example, if you start saying, as a policy analysis says, the government will run a school. Now, that's a really bad idea. But let us say you come to this idea that a government should run the school. And by the way, this happens in Australia where I work. So the governments are running schools here, which is a real issue, a real problem. In terms of the quality, I believe there's a significant scope for improvement in the system in Australia. But that's a separate story. In the case of the government failure of government teachers in India, this is a really big issue. And despite the few teachers who are really good, and I really admire them, I studied in government school towards the end of my school career. I believe that the average school or the below average school, and there are 80% of them are below average, let's say. That's a really unfortunate situation where a vast number of schools either non-existent or teachers hardly come or not qualified, can't teach. This kind of government school is actually harming children rather than benefiting them in any way. So and how do we get good teachers in? How do we actually manage them? How do we get them, how do we pay them well? How do we, promote them? This is a matter which is too difficult and too big a job. And if you don't do that properly in your analysis, policy analysis, you're going to fail. By the way, I was the secretary of the education department in Assam, and I had the responsibility for secondary education in particular. And I can assure you that the failure in the system was absolutely overwhelming and chronic. It was something to be seen, to be believed, the level of incompetence, the level of corruption that was happening in the system. But I'll not go into details there. What I was talking about is government failure. Now, government failure is basically all about the competence and the incentives of the government employees. You cannot assume that government employees are not going to cheat. Be aware that the first principle of economics is opportunism, that we assume that everybody is opportunist. An opportunist means that they may cheat if there's an opportunity provided to them. Now, they didn't say they will cheat. I suspect a person like Gandhi will not cheat even if the opportunity is provided to him. And there are many people like Gandhi around. I have seen in my own relatives and families some extraordinarily, honest people, and then there are some who will actually, given the slightest opportunity, will cheat. So there's a spectrum of people out there, and my understanding is around 2% of people are really bad, and they will cheat when given the slightest opportunity. About 1/3 of the people will cheat when given a major opportunity. About 2/3 of the people will cheat only if given a real reason to cheat. So 2/3 people, I'd say, generally tend to be honest in a well-functioning society. But that doesn't really help us if we aren't having a system to catch those 1/3 people. Okay, so that's where your participation and incentive constraint come in. There's not much time in this video to talk in detail about that. I've actually elaborated this issue in one of my videos at the talk I gave at the Institute of Public Administration in Delhi, I think in 2013. That video is available on the internet. It's at the India Policy Institute. Do have a look at it. It'll actually give you an outline of what it means to get the two incentives right. So we need to get the right incentive, the participation constraint. That means we must have the right mechanics and right incentives, so salary or whatever structure of the, perquisites or anything that you have as part of your job, that you attract good people to that. Okay, but then you have to pay them a little bit more than what they would get outside, a little bit more, and that's really important because that prevents them from cheating. Because if they were to cheat, they would actually lose the job. And then they would go outside, and outside they'll get less money. Okay, apart from the fact that the system should be strong enough that they'll catch people if they cheat, but really it is very hard to catch people when they cheat. On the other hand, it's better to prevent people from cheating in the first place. Okay, that's a much more effective policy. It's a very stupid idea to have a Jan Lokpal as the only strategy, which is an utter fool like Arvind Kejriwal can only think of such things. So let's leave them aside. But those kind of things can only work in the extreme margin, 1 or 2% of the cases. But for the vast majority of the potential people who will cheat, you want to have a mechanism by which they are prevented from cheating, because if they cheat, they will lose when they go out to the rest of the open market. So this is the kind of thinking that occurs in terms of governance design, and that's some of the things that we need to do in India. We do it very badly. I would say Indian system is ultra incompetent and ultra corrupt. So that's my experience of India's system. There is simply no accountability, and this reminds me of the general principle that we have in Swarn Bharat Party, or the general policy. We cannot have tenure. Tenure is absolutely fatal to accountability and to a system where there is no cheating and other things. Because if you have a tenure like you have for the IAS and other things in India, and you can't remove them because of governmental, constitutional restraints and the courts and appeals and whatnot, there's an endless process, then you really are stuck. You'll never get the bad guys out, and so they get really motivated, and they become really fat. And some of my friends, I won't name them, have become really fat as part of this corrupt process of the IAS. So that is the point. I just want to mention that government failure is chronic. We must have a very solid reason and solid analysis of government failure in our policy analysis, and how we are actually going to eliminate that government failure. If we don't do that, be assured that you will fail. No matter how good your cost benefit comes out to be and how good other things happen, your policy will fail. All right. So just keep in mind that policy is a combination, as I keep harping, not only of the target and you got to hit the bullet, the target, the bullet, but also the rifle, the gun which fires the bullet, which is your governance machine. Your machine of governance has to be really good. Otherwise, you're going to miss the target. Your gun will blow up in your face. Actually, that's what happens in India. Quickly turning to cost-benefit analysis, I will just highlight some of the main elements of cost-benefit analysis, and then we finish our 15 minutes or so today, and that should be done. I think I've highlighted in my first video the real theoretical issue with the cost-benefit analysis. It's not feasible, and it's not technically, and you can't aggregate people's preferences. Therefore, the social cost-benefit analysis concept is fundamentally flawed. Okay. Having said that, despite its flaws, I strongly recommend it, and we as a party recommend it, because it is the best alternative to not doing any cost-benefit analysis. If you do nothing, you are likely to make a bigger mistake than if you make a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so that's why we do a cost-benefit analysis to the best of our ability, and sometimes it can cost a bit of money to get a good cost-benefit analysis done. As I mentioned previously, all costs and all benefits must be included. Some of the things that people don't normally think of, I would like to emphasize. Example is delays, time costs. Time is really precious, and time is money. And that particular thing, in terms of how long these decisions may take, or how long a particular process takes, that adds to the costs on the concerned party and ultimately passed on to the consumer. So what we are talking about is analysis that captures all costs, and delay costs are an important one. Some things that we probably often people don't capture is the cost of anti-competitive policies. What will happen if you really block somebody from entering an occupation? It's pretty hard, isn't it? Because you don't know. Let's say you say only people with certain things can become a doctor, right? Then what you've done is you've prevented people from becoming a doctor, because if they haven't passed your hurdle, whatever the hurdle is, it's not just a degree, because degree is something that's a different thing. But after degree, then you put extra hurdles. Those hurdles are called anti-competitive barriers, and those barriers have a cost in terms of reduced number of doctors in the market. How many doctors reduced? How much harm done to society? That's a cost to be estimated. The prohibitions are ghastly. They have a very significant negative effect on society when you prohibit something. However, it may be necessary in some cases to prohibit it. It's pretty hard to achieve prohibition. So I'd say it's a very rare and extreme case where you'd actually prohibit something. A very, very rare case. But even then, the prohibition is a very significant cost, anti-competitive, prevents jobs, prevents opportunity. That has to be counted. It's very hard to count them, these costs. But then there's a thing called willingness to pay. Sometimes people use that. Sometimes people use other methodologies, and I won't go into details. But those are the kind of methodologies people use to quantify these costs. Okay. Things to note. Very often ministers I know that I'm aware of are very keen to count the number of jobs that are created as part of a particular process, a construction process. So let's say you're actually going to build something for the poor, and that particular thing is going to save them time. Let's say it's a bridge. It saves them extra amount of time. Therefore, there's a cost benefit to society. There's a cost to the bridge. But then there's the number of people who work to get the bridge done. That's actually part of the costs. Remember that? That's part of your labor costs. But what politicians do, they like to do, is to say that we have created this many jobs as part of the process. But sorry, that was your cost. That is your labor cost, number one. Number two, you've actually taken that labor away from other productive work. So this labor was going to do something else with its time. Would have built a house, would have done something more useful. If there was no demand for houses, they would have built some other machine or factory. Now, that person or engineer has been brought in to build a bridge for you, right? That's actually a diversion from somebody else, some other productive use. You're paying the marginal, product, and therefore the price for that particular person. Therefore, it's basically counted in terms of the cost itself, but do not add that as a benefit. So what's the cost must be kept separate, benefits kept separate. This is one of the some of the mistakes people make in cost benefit analysis. Then once you've done the whole thing, the cost on one side, the benefits on one side, you obviously have a sequence. Costs come up front, the benefits may come after 5 years. So there's a kind of sequence, and then you have the analysis. If you know the discounted cost net present value analysis, it's a straightforward analysis used in all cost benefit investments for investments. So the same principle applies, but here you have a different discount rate. You normally have a lower discount rate that's used in social cost benefit analysis to the private discount rate. If you're putting your own money, you have you expect a much higher rate of return. 6%, 7%, 8%, whatever. But in a government case, you might expect a lower return, which is acceptable for a project or a policy, so long as you're getting the whole society to benefit from that. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that is done as far as the cost benefit analysis goes. Sometimes it is not possible to quantify these costs, and it's really hard. I know it's very, very hard to do these things, and sometimes the policy impact is really so small that you really don't have the time and money to do the cost benefit analysis properly anyway. What you then do is multi-criteria analysis. You actually list the main criteria, identify the cost benefits, call them high, low, or medium, or whatever. Put some qualitative analysis around the situation, and then at the end of it, total it up, and based on your estimates, you can actually you got to show your work. Okay, it's like in mathematics, when you get a right answer in an exam, you actually have to show your work. That's more important than your answer. As far as I know, that's what happens in the higher and higher level of maths. The lower level maths, maybe both are important, but actually the answer is not really important as you go up the ladder in terms of mathematics. The work is important. Show your work. Likewise, in the case of cost benefit analysis, multi-criteria analysis, etc., you need to show your work. Be very clear about your assumptions. Tell us why you have used this particular approach. Logically explain. Provide references. Sometimes the references should be really robust. I've seen cost benefit analysis where people have cooked up something that just suits them. They've cherry picked the data. Basically, some useless study which is really bad quality. They've used that and they've not included the studies which actually say something else. That's not good policy. Okay, if you want to drive good policy and have the society benefit from it, you must provide the genuine best estimate available of any particular impact. Then, of course, there's the cost-benefit analysis. There's the sensitivity analysis at the end of the cost-benefit analysis. No cost-benefit analysis or multivariate analysis is complete without sensitivity analysis, which is actually saying, what if I was wrong? What if my assumption that this particular thing is going to give this benefit is actually not correct? What about this happens? So there's a lower end of their benefits. What about the cost getting higher than expected? And at that time, you will start seeing whether the policy or project is worthwhile under certain situations. So it becomes sometimes possible that the project or the policy is viable only under very narrow circumstances. At that point, you generally say, no, it's not a good idea because it's too risky to expect everything to fall into place. And so because there's a wide range of things that can happen, you've just taken the very narrow end. Not a good idea. Let's abandon this particular policy. Even though it might otherwise have passed the various other tests, then you abandon that. And then, of course, as I said, provide all calculations and make sure you have consulting everybody. I've already discussed consultation earlier. This, I think, was the summary of the cost-benefit analysis approach. And I'll move on to other issues in the coming videos. All right, thanks.